So I've been invited back this year. It's exactly a year since I hosted a session on women's health in the workplace, but more broadly, excuse me, I'm really struggling with a really bad cold today, that I delivered a session on menopause in the workplace. And I was invited back this year to talk about kind of the evolution of that topic in the 12 months that I've witnessed and experienced, and also what the landscape of women's health looks like moving forward in the workplace. And I think the key thing is that we actually now talk more broadly about women's health rather than menopause in the workplace for a couple of reasons, because it allows us to make a more inclusive conversation across the generations, but also because there are so many complexities and links between other health challenges and issues that women may face throughout their career. So that, I would say, is probably the first change in that evolution over the last 12 months for sure. It's also a multi-billion-pound business, is the midlife women. We are the fastest growing demographic in the workplace, so it would stand to reason that there is a lot of opportunity there, I guess, for commercial businesses. But menopause in itself is a multi-billion-pound global business now, which is really interesting, because it's almost like it's popped up out of nowhere. That was my first sort of thought on that it has evolved in the last 12 months very much. But I just wanted to, I appreciate that there might be some people who weren't on that session last year, so I just wanted to cover off a few of the key aspects of it. So what we're going to cover is how have women's health in the workplace conversations evolved? How is government policy influencing how we talk about women's health? How can employers' approach to women's health create a more inclusive workplace? And what does the future look like? And there is my QR code at the end of the slide deck. If you have any questions, there is Q&A opportunity throughout the session. Please put them in the chat. But I'm just really conscious that if you've got questions that you want to ask and I don't get a chance to ask them because of time constraints, I want to be able to give you that opportunity. So either we will manage the chat in that way, and I will come back to everybody individually who has a question, or if you do want to reach out to me via LinkedIn Messenger, I will answer your questions that way. Or if you would like me to do more of a deep dive into any of the things that we talk about today, I'm really happy to do that as well. So could you move us on, Ned, please? Thank you. So I thought it was really pertinent to just cover the 3 stages of menopause, because if this is your first time you've entered into a conversation about it, it's just relevant to point it out. But also the terminology in itself has evolved, and I think that's really quite key to how we open up the conversation, because when I launched our policy in 2021, the terminology was pretty much just around menopause, and that is actually a date in time that you only know retrospectively, because menopause is the point when you haven't had a period for 12 months, so you only know that retrospectively. And what I found was I was only getting engagement in the conversation from women who were coming up to that average age of menopause, which is 51. So it was quite a contained group of people that were taking part in the conversation. And even earlier this week, I was presenting to a client group, so I'm doing a workshop for them. And one of the ladies said, "Oh, I'm really struggling with a specific one of the 45 symptoms of menopause, which actually is incredibly heavy and unmanageable periods." And she said, "But it can't be menopause because I'm only 44 and the average age is 51. Well, actually, perimenopause, the average age is 41, and 4 in 100 women can go into early perimenopause anyway, and it can be down to forced menopause through hysterectomy, or it can be due to cancer treatment, it can be due to a number of other illnesses, etc. So there's still assumptions being made that it can't possibly be me because I'm 7 years off being the average age of menopause. So the definition of perimenopause can be for 10 years before you actually go into menopause, which is just a day, but that's when you can start to experience, and even younger, experience those symptoms. There are known to be more than 45. 45 is the generally accepted number, and I can let you have a symptom checker which shows you what the 45 symptoms are. Unfortunately, on this session, we don't have time to go through all of them. So those are some definitions that I've just put up on the screen of what perimenopause is, menopause, and postmenopause. So postmenopause is any time after that day where you haven't had a period for 12 months. But you can see from that you are already opening up the conversation to a broader group of people to help them to understand from a personal perspective, a managerial perspective, or from an allyship perspective as well. So would you just move us on, Peter, please? Thank you. So how have women's health in the workplace conversations evolved over the last 12 months? So some key stats here that I think are quite interesting, and it shows that, you know, we are making some progress, but there is still a lot of work to do. And we absolutely acknowledge that in the UK and Ireland, there is still work to do. But I think it's really comforting that actually we are further ahead of, as an example, the US and Canada, New Zealand, Australia, and most other large countries in the work that we're doing and the conversations that we're having. So that's really pleasing to see, but we acknowledge there's still much work to do. 65% of women are uncomfortable talking about health issues at work. Over 40% work through the pain of menstrual issues. One of the key ones from a financial perspective and a talent perspective is we're losing 14 million work days a year due to menopause. Over 50% of employers are not supportive. This is some feedback given for women. 1 in 10 have left a job due to their menopause symptoms. But what we are starting to see is organisations are losing talent to more compassionate employers. So it's not that women are making choices now about where it is they want to work and where they want to take their talent, which is a really interesting evolution. And that's partly because all of the education, the training, the accreditations, the pledges that organisations can do. It says here, women are twice as likely to experience mental health issues at work than men due to infertility, PMS, and menopause. So not being heard and not being understood and not having the right support in place. And tribunals linked to menopause are rising 44% every year. Now, the impact of that, so there were 2 cases, and one of the workshops that I do on menopause for managers is around ensuring that you are protecting your organisation, supporting your staff through policy and through having the right checks and balances in place. But what I'm starting to see is that some leaders are becoming much more aware of the impact of not doing the right thing. So there were 2 really highly publicised cases in the last month. One of those was a lady working for a private company who took them to a tribunal. She'd been there 25 years, and she was. They made jokes about her menopause, made her feel uncomfortable, etc. And she won £37,000. The second one was a council. The lady was a social worker, and it was, I think, Leicester City Council that were taken to a tribunal. And when I'm working with a lot of leaders, particularly male leaders, they're saying, we absolutely want to join the conversation. We want to support. We want to be allies. We know it's the right thing to do. We're just really uncomfortable as senior leaders in large organizations. We're really uncomfortable and fearful of saying the wrong thing. So please help us, please educate us, which is fantastic. But for every one of those walking forward and saying that, my concern is there are others that are just thinking, I don't want to get into this conversation. So education is absolutely key to changing the situation for women in the workplace. So about 12 to 18 months ago, menopause in the workplace was a very topical issue being addressed by many HR professionals and businesses. But what has positive progress been made? And these are some of the findings from the survey that CIPD published just recently. So 46% of organisations are including provision for menopause transition versus 30% last year. So I think 16% increase is an impressive number. And what I find is that most organisations are doing broadly the same kinds of activities. So I'll come on to talk about some of those shortly, but it's really good to see that that consistency is starting to happen. The main support offered by organisations are planned flexible working, e.g. reduced hours or working from home, which is incredible if you work in a role where you absolutely can do that. What that doesn't support are those non-autonomous roles where you've absolutely no choice but to turn up and be present because of the nature of the job that you do. And when I come on to talk about the government strategy, I will go into more detail around that and what we're doing around that. 49% of organisations encourage an open and supportive culture where employees can talk about their issues, which is positive, not just from a women's health perspective, but from much broader, being able to bring your own whole self to work, etc. And public sector and non-profit organisations are leading the way on these issues. And actually, that's interesting for me because I'm seeing some of that for sure. But I'm also seeing a lot of large employers doing some really impressive work that we are, as part of the government strategy, sharing with smaller employers so that they can learn and benefit from it as well. So I'm going to come on to now the government policy around how we talk about women's health. So I didn't do this at the start of the session, but I actually work for the Adecco group, which LHH is part of, and my day job is Head of Talent and Inclusion in the Adecco group, and I cover how we attract, recruit, onboard, retain, develop talent throughout the organisation, underpinned by our ED&I strategy and focus, which I absolutely love doing that job, and partly because of some of the work that I've done around menopause in the workplace, the lobbying of government, the work I've done with our client base. I was asked in March of this year to be the government's menopause employment champion. The role came about because the Women and Equality Select Committee and the All Political Party Group for Menopause in the Workplace recommended somebody who was solely focused on menopause in the workplace. It's an absolute honour and a privilege to do this job. It's an entirely voluntary role, which I think is important given the backdrop of the multi-billion-pound menopause business that we're now seeing. And the reason that I stress that it's voluntary is because I'm passionate about making the experience better for all women everywhere, regardless of their ethnicity, race, background, socioeconomic demographic, regardless of whether they choose to work in the third sector, for a large employer, for an SME employer. So everything that we are doing in this space is free at the point of access for any organisation or any employee. So I'm just going to talk to you a little bit about the strategy that we've deployed. I had to submit a report when I've been in the role for 6 months, which coincided with World Menopause Day back in October. And the report is called No Time to Step Back. It's available on the government's website, but if anybody wants me to send them a copy of that, I absolutely can. And out of that came the No Time to Step Back strategy. And it'll become apparent in a few minutes why I called it that. So it's really, I needed it to be easy to remember because I've got quite a lot going on. So I'm looking at, it's a 5-4-3-2-1 strategy. I'm looking at 5 sectors. I've got a 4-point plan, 4-brand strategy. I'm looking at 3 types of roles, 2 types of symptoms, but with 1 key message. So my 5 sectors that I am looking at are retail, hospitality, manufacturing, care, and professional and technical. I'll come back to that in a moment. I'm looking at 4 particular strategies. sector-specific best practice, the Menopause Workplace Pledge, a national allyship programme, and an amplification strategy. So I'll cover those off together. So we chose those 5 sectors because they are sectors where it's often difficult to attract staff and retain them. And as I said earlier, women over 50, fastest growing demographic in the workplace. We're all going to be working for longer for a number of complex reasons that I haven't got time to go into in this session. It's an entirely separate session that I can do. But broadly, we will be working for longer. And so we should be able to if we want to. And those can be sectors where there's a lot of complexity. So some organisations have got professional and technical, retail and manufacturing in the same organisations. And I love working with those complex organisations because what works for one part doesn't necessarily work for another. And we kicked off our strategy at a cross-sector event at West Ham Football Club on the 20th of September, and we chose there because they're one of the most forward-thinking football clubs when it comes to women's health and menopause in the workplace. And we had representation, large organisations from all of those 5 sectors. We also had the sector bodies from all those 5 sectors as well, supporting the conversation. And what we agreed there is that we would use the government's Help to Grow portal and share best practice across employers on that portal. So that if in my research, I'd spoken to a lot of women who worked in small independent organisations that didn't have that best practice, and they didn't have training and education, they didn't have allyship programs, so they didn't have the support that the large employers in their sectors were creating and producing. So at that session, we agreed that we would use that portal to share that best practice. And the great thing was that all of those employers that attended willingly wanted to share their best practice, not for competitive advantage, but to make the lives of women across their sector better when they were experiencing perimenopause and menopause. And we've since created a working group called No Time to Step Back, where we're not only sharing about women's health, but sharing about other aspects of working life as well, and sharing that best practice, which is really incredible. So we now have got working groups in all of those sectors and roundtable events where we're bringing more and more employers into the conversation who want to take part and want to share for the greater experience of women everywhere. And then, so that's the first part of my strategy. So the sector-specific best practice, which will be a combination of education, best practice guidance, videos, podcasts, case studies, lots of different ways of learning and developing, because everybody learns differently. The second aspect of it is a national allyship programme. So the first part of it went live on World Menopause Day, the Help to Grow portal. The second part of it will go live on International Women's Day, when we will create our national allyship programme, and we're just looking at the tech that sits behind that. So many women I spoke to felt they got nobody to talk to, either in the workplace or outside of the workplace. And again, large organisations often have really good allyship programmes, coffee mornings, brunches, etc., ways in which women can link up and talk about their experiences. And being able to talk about those experiences is really, really important. Seek help, seek guidance, and just have somebody to talk to. So we're setting up a national allyship programme where, as an example, if you work in a small retail outlet and you don't have anyone to talk to internally, we can link you up with somebody in a large retail organisation so they can share the types of things that they're doing and give you support and just wrap their virtual arms around you. The third aspect of it is the Menopause Workplace Pledge. As I said earlier, women are making choices about where it is they want to work and who they want to work for. So that means that if I'm encouraging employers to sign the Menopause Workplace Pledge so that women can see that an employer, again, free of charge, can see that an employer is menopause friendly. I'm also doing that for women who are out of work. There are 630,000 women aged between 45 and 55 who are currently economically inactive. And it can be very hard to move back into the workplace if you've been out of work for a period of time. If you've gone into perimenopause or menopause within that period, it can be doubly hard. I want to break down those barriers. And the last part of it is, as I said, I'm just one person and I've got a day job as well. So I'm working with a number of sector bodies, but also strategic partners who are really happy to support me and amplify the messaging to employers and employees about what we are doing. The third aspect of it is, so point 3, is I'm looking at the 3 types of roles. So those autonomous roles where you think, oh, that's great because I can pretty much, if I haven't slept, if I've had night sweats and I can work from home, that's great. Or if I'm really struggling with very heavy periods or some other more gynecological based problem, which is a symptom of menopause, I can work from home. But that doesn't necessarily help the psychological symptoms of menopause. So we need to be really careful about people who are working in very autonomous roles. Semi-autonomous roles are saying you might have some opportunity to flex your working day depending on how you're feeling or what your symptoms are, but it's the non-autonomous roles that fall into those sectors when you're in a retail environment, or you might be working in a restaurant or a hotel. You might be on a production line and not be able to step away. You might be caring for somebody in their own home, or you may be in a professional role where it is more about, I've got that autonomy, but that's not helping me with the psychological symptoms. So I'm also looking at the 2 types of symptoms, those 45 broad symptoms. Some are practical, some are psychological, but nonetheless impactful. 67% of women have said that who left the workplace due to menopause have said it's because of the psychological symptoms, not the practical symptoms. So we need to be really mindful of that. And that comes down to anxiety, loss of confidence, lack of sleep. Sleep is such an important aspect of it, but there are so many symptoms that you can put into 2 pots, really, the practical and the psychological. If you don't manage the practical properly, it impacts on the psychological. But in all that, and I feel like I'm rapidly losing my voice today, I've got one key message. And that message is, just move the slide on for me, Nida. So the key message is that menopause is an entirely natural but sometimes difficult period affecting 51% of the population. But this is not a time to step down, step back, or step out of their working life. Women over 50 are the fastest growing demographic in the workplace, and when employers provide education and allyship, which creates cultural change, women can go on to have arguably the most productive and fulfilling time of their careers. And I truly, truly believe that if you have the right support and you have good allies in the workplace, it makes such a difference. I said at an event that I stood up at the other day, when I was perimenopausal, there is no way I would have been able to do that, partly because of my practical symptoms, and as I alluded to and have many times in the press and the media, one of my symptoms, which 44% of women have, was incredibly heavy and erratic periods. So I wouldn't have dared stand up in front of a group of people to present. But that obviously had an impact on me from a confidence perspective. I wouldn't have had the confidence to do it either. So now I'm postmenopausal. I feel like I'm in a completely different place, but I work for an employer who really supported me through that. So I truly believe that it's not a time to step back, which is why I call the strategy No Time to Step Back. So that's an overview of what government is doing. Please take a look on the gov.uk website, or reach out to me if you want to know any more about it, or if you think I can support your organisation from that perspective. Next slide, please. So how can employers approach to women's health create a more inclusive workplace? And there are so many things that an organisation can do. But as I said earlier, what I see is organisations are doing broadly three or four things really, really well. So the key things that I would point out are education is everything because it helps everyone. Allyship is incredibly important, and good allies can make a huge difference in an organisation. Leadership buy-in, so employee resource groups are incredible. That's what gets the work started. But without leadership buy-in, it tends to stagnate. So make sure you've got those ERGs, but you've also got leadership buy-in. And the lived experience, if you can get somebody to open up and talk about their experiences, which allows other people to talk about theirs, that's a really positive thing. And those are the things that I've seen have changed the culture of our organisation. And we use those principles of education, allyship, leadership buy-in and lived experience to change the culture on a lot of different topics. We just happen to start it with menopause in the workplace. So I would advise, have a policy because it's something to kick off the conversation. Don't have a policy and just pop it in a drawer and hope that it works, because it won't if it doesn't live and breathe. Broaden it out and call it a women's health policy and have menopause underneath it, but lots of other different topics, fertility, period management in the workplace. Really broaden it out as much as you can. Excuse me, sorry. We've used a symptoms checklist. You can get app-based versions, so there's the Balance app, the Stella app. We use a paper one or an online version, which has started off countless conversations, whether that be with line managers, GPs, or with partners. It's a great tool to be able to say, this is what I'm experiencing, this is how I feel. Colleagues and manager toolkit, we produce those at the same time as we produce our menopause policy. And we also did manager training and allyship training in the organisation, which we still do now, and I do for clients externally all the time. And the final thing is, show the outside world that you are a menopause-friendly organisation. Sign the menopause pledge, which will attract talented midlife women to come to your organisation. I've already talked about, I'm fanatical about the role of education, allyship, the lived experience, leadership buy-in, which changes the cultural change. And it's so important to me that what we do is for every woman everywhere. For all women, that should say, because it was plural, not singular. So what does the future look like? What I'm seeing in the next 12 months, sort of coming down the track, the evolution, everything of this, from an EDI perspective, from a women's health perspective, is constantly evolving. But what I'm seeing is, can you just move on, Mita, please? Three key aspects. So I'm seeing intersectionality becoming more important. So we know that menopause affects 51% of the population, but it affects the 51% of the population in different ways. And those are just some examples there that neurodivergent women can have an entirely different experience from a neurotypical woman. One neurodivergent woman compared to another one would have a different experience anyway. The experience for Black women, whether from a cultural perspective or a symptomatic perspective, is very different. And again, South Asian women experience menopause entirely differently. And those are just examples. That isn't, a finite list, because intersectionality means that we look at everybody as an individual and look at how it affects them. So that is becoming much more interesting, much more talked about, and much more important. Intergeneration. So, as I said right at the start, we started off with a group of women who were broadly late 40s, early 50s. We are now opening out that conversation to include other aspects of women's health in the workplace. Again, some top level examples there, but it allows us to bring more women into the conversation, to feel more included and take away some of the headwinds that women face in the workplace, and the wider impact, the inclusivity. And I mean this in a really sensitive and important way, that I'm starting to see organisations now who are creating that psychological safe space so anybody can talk about the impact that it's having on them. So as an example, I work with a number of police forces who have started to talk to like their firearms officers, because one particular firearms officer had come in and said, my wife is having night sweats, she's not sleeping, and therefore I'm not sleeping as well. And he wasn't meaning it in a, it's my problem as well, which obviously it clearly is, but in a negative way. But he was questioning whether he should have been operating a firearm because he hadn't had any sleep the night before. And as I said earlier, sleep is incredibly important. And 2 nights of lost sleep is the equivalent of being over the drink drive limit. So from a work perspective, we work with engineering companies who are starting to think about that holistically and that wider impact. Should you be operating heavy machinery? But I think it's really important to talk about the impact from a family, a colleague, an allyship perspective. So again, broadening out of the conversation, normalising the conversation. That's where I see the direction of travel being in the next sort of 12 to 18 months. So I hope that was helpful. If you want to reach out to me, please scan the barcode or just drop me a note on LinkedIn Messenger, and I'm going to open up the chat now. Mila's very kindly going to manage it for me to see if there's any questions.
Hello.
Thank you. If anybody would like to ask me or make any comments or add anything to the conversation, please feel free. Yeah. Can you take them off mute or?
Hi, Helen.
Hi. Hello.
That was one of the most useful sessions, and I think I've found more insights again after attending quite a few menopausal workshops and discussions. Yeah. And I have a personal experience with it because, you mentioned cancer very early on. Mm-hmm. And it is highly possible that people who are very young and have had cancer treatments or transplant may enter menopause very early on. In your experience, have you seen what kind of support has been given to these young people by organizations? Or is there something in your policy? Because I love the fact that you broadened that policy to, encompass women's health. Mm-hmm. Is there a draft available or anything? Because that is something I would be really, really keen, because I'm an EDI practitioner at work and also HR. Yeah. So that really resonated with me very strongly.
Absolutely, and that's the reason that we have opened the conversation out much more, because people are coming forward and saying, I'm only, and that this happens all the time when I'm talking to clients, that people are talking to me about, I'm only 33, whatever, or even younger, and I'm going into menopause and or perimenopause. And actually, in my own experience, I had a hysterectomy due to my very heavy periods that I talked about. And when I left the hospital, the surgeon said to me, you may go into menopause. And I was like, this is 2015, and I just went, how will I know? And he just went, oh, you'll know. And that was it. So there was no education and no conversation around what it was going to be like. And actually I didn't, but I do know that it's very limited. And you can say I ran a workshop on Tuesday, and one of the ladies there had exactly the same experience, but she'd taken it a different way, and she'd gone and researched HRT, and she asked them to put her on HRT straight away. But yeah, I don't think there is as much provision from a medical perspective as there probably could be. We know that there's a lack of education around the topic anyway from a GP perspective, but I'm seeing more and more organisations that are really thinking about that, and not just because they have somebody in their organisation that's experiencing it. So it's that, we might have somebody who comes into the organisation, what do we do for them? So it's definitely evolving. Does that
Thank you.
help?
Yeah, and is there a policy, a draft somewhere available on any of
Yeah,
your portals?
there are a number of policies online, draft policies, but I can absolutely send you a copy of mine. If you link into me, I'll send that to you.
Will do. Thanks, Ellen.
Okay, thank you. Anything else?
We've got a question. Is a menopause policy better than a menopause guide? We were trying to steer clear of a policy so we could keep generalist and encourage people to talk.
When I first launched my policy, I thought I'd done a great thing. And actually now, if somebody came to me and said, can I see the menopause policy? I would feel like I'd totally failed, because a policy is only something that you go to when you're not getting what you need from an organization. So without the manager so we did a podcast first before we launched the policy, because nobody had ever mentioned the word in the organization, I don't think, until the run up to World Menopause Day in 2021. So we did a podcast, myself, two other senior leaders. We talked about our experiences of perimenopause and menopause, the impact it had had on our day-to-day life, on our jobs, etc. It was just lucky that we had very diverse symptoms. So we got, but what that did was it allowed other people to come forward and start to talk about their symptoms. So then after that, we did like an all hands coffee morning brunch session on the topic. Then we launched a network, Hot Topics Network, which we still have now. We launched manager training, and we launched allyship training. So because we've done all that and we've really lived and breathed it, nobody's ever asked us to see the policy. But what I'm saying is it's important that you do all that to wrap around it, because just a policy on its own doesn't really mean that much. And now, you know, we look at it from a more holistic perspective. So it is more guidance rather than we have a women's health policy and we have an ED&I policy. But the guidance sits below, references the particular topics. So I would say, in hindsight, probably should have been guidance from the get-go, but I was super proud to be launching a policy.
I've got another question. I would be interested in finding out more about the content of the colleague and manager toolkit.
Yeah, absolutely. So I run a workshop on menopause for managers, and as an output of the session, you get a manager toolkit and a colleague toolkit. If you want me to do that, please drop me a note, and I'm really happy to hold those sessions for you. They are free of charge. I do have to obviously think about costs and cost of my time, but there's no actual charge for the session and the documents as well.
Have you any tips or questions we can ask the men who have volunteered to join us in a menopause cafe in the new year?
Say that again for me.
We are running our next menopause cafe in the new year, and we wanted the topic to be men and the menopause. Have you any tips or questions we can ask the men who have volunteered to join us?
I'm assuming from that is it a men only session? Maybe. So I'll assume from that it's a men only session. So what I would do is I would say this is a safe space, because that's what in my experience, men are asking for. They just want to be able to ask a question without feeling uncomfortable, embarrassed, saying the wrong thing. And very often what I've experienced is it starts off about the workplace, but then very often people ask questions that relate to outside of the workplace. And I actually don't mind that, because education is education, regardless of where their starting point is. So a lot of organisations can be quite polarised about men-only sessions. However, when I have done them, they've been incredible. I did one for DWP. There were 800 men on it, and all it took was one person to start the conversation, and it just flowed really naturally. And sometimes having somebody come in and host it that you then don't have to sit next to in a boardroom or in a canteen, whatever sort of environment you work in, is much easier, because I talk about some things that probably, if you have to work with these guys week in, week out, you might not want to talk about. So sometimes that can work, having somebody who doesn't know your organisation kicking off that safe space conversation.
Thank you. I've got another question. In a woman's career, one is always struggling with periods, childbearing, infertility, taking care of children, and then going into menopause. I sometimes wonder how it is technically possible for us to have a successful career with these constant physical and psychological constraints.
I agree, and that's absolutely why we broadened it out to look at women's health in the workplace, because some of the, you know, when you look at the motherhood penalty, you look at the pension poverty for women, how challenging it can be. I felt that just to talk about one aspect of that was really doing a woman's career disservice. So yes, I would agree with you, but I do think throughout that, if you I think the world's definitely changing for sure. When I look back at when I came back from maternity leave, and you know, it was almost like you had to forget that you'd just had a child and get on with it. And the things that I missed out on and the things that I sacrificed, we wouldn't ask somebody to do that now, and nor should we. So the world is definitely evolving, but there is still a real financial penalty, which can be very, very challenging. And that's why we don't want women to feel that they have to leave the workplace due to perimenopause and menopause from that, you know, financial, professional, confidence, pension pot perspective, none of those. So yes, it's not easy.
Thank you, Helen. We don't currently have any more questions.
Okay. Thank you. So if we've covered everything that everybody wanted to cover, I hope you've enjoyed that. If you would like me to do something else for you as an organisation, I'm really happy to have that conversation. The more messaging we can do, the better. And if you want to be involved in the conversation from a government perspective, I'm always looking for employers who want to share their best practice. So thank you. And yeah, from my perspective, you absolutely can have a copy of the slides. I mean, these are just my thoughts about, you know, the evolution of women's health in the workplace. So of course you can have those slides. I will get Meda to do that. Thank you.